What's up, everyone? This is Raphael Garcia here for episode 162 of the MMA Ratings Podcast. I didn't realize I just
I
didn't.
think it's 161.
161? Yeah, that's right. That's right. 161, man. I'm kind of all over the place this evening. But as you heard from that voice, Schwan Humes is MIA. He may have been kidnapped again by his children, but we will hope that he joins in at some point in time. But instead, we have a strong number two coming in for the save today. Michael Ford, say hello. Tell everybody how you doing today.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast.
Good stuff, man. We have some couple of things to talk about today. We're going to talk about three, you heard right, three new UFC events being announced, and all three are going to go down in 1 week. So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk about some fighter comments about fighting around this time and take a couple of questions that we got over the week. But before we do that, I want to take the time, as always, to thank everyone for taking the opportunity to listen to this show and support our content. As always, you can go over to MMAratings.net first and foremost. That's the flagship, to read all of our content there and rate the fights using our star system, letting everybody know either how excited you are for upcoming fights or what you thought about fights as they occur. So let us all know how excited you are for MMA action, specifically coming back up in the next few weeks. You can also find our podcast content over on Spotify, Anchor, Apple, iTunes, and Google Podcasts, where we usually host all of our content from a week-to-week basis, including this show and our Let's Talk Wrestling podcast, which usually comes on Thursday or Friday, depending on when I have the time to do it. And
And
then
our upcoming interview series, which we've talked about.
that's correct. And we just launched the first one with Fernanda Parches, which was, I think, 2 weeks ago, which is a great show. And I have another one lined up. We will probably be doing this Sunday. I haven't announced who, but it's someone
Right.
I work closely with, and I'm looking forward to talking.
Yeah,
Uh,
that interview was really good. I recommend it to anyone who hasn't heard it yet. But yeah, seek it out. It's timeless material. It's not time sensitive, but it's fun. It's
it
really,
was a
yeah.
good conversation, and we actually talked extensively about the movie Bloodsport, which is relevant because there's a action movie or a combat sports movie tournament that's going on. I think Bloody Elbow is doing it, I believe. And
Okay.
right now, somehow Bloodsport lost in this.
No, to what?
Enter the Dragon. No, was it Enter the Dragon? It's either Enter the Dragon or Rocky 2.
Those are strong choices, I have to agree.
So I'm pretty pissed off about that, but everyone can't have great taste.
Enter the Dragon is a classic.
Enter the Dragon is a classic, and it has like the right because that's the one with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right?
No. That's still uh, Jim Kelly as
Jim
the
Kelly. I'm sorry, that's what I meant. Yes, correct. All right, so I mean, he was a legit martial artist back in the day, so
right.
it is a great movie.
Yeah, and he had the iconic, swag look
That
of,
fro, that
taking
fro is
taking the
iconic.
women back before the fight. It's, like there's some classic stuff there.
That fro was legendary.
Yeah, no doubt.
So let's go ahead and jump right into the show, man. We got three. You heard that right. 3 UFC events that were announced this past week. We have UFC Fight Night 171, which goes down on May 13th. Then we have UFC Fight Night 172 going down 3 days later on May 16th, followed up by UFC Fight Night 173, which will be on May 23rd. So that means we have fights on the 9th, 13th, 16th, and 23rd. What do you think about this, Michael? First thoughts on how the MMA world, specifically UFC, is looking to ramp back up and do it at a fast pace. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, the first thought I have is a question. I didn't know about the one on the 23rd. I know that they were talking about it, but I didn't know it was official. Is that also at the Jacksonville location, or?
That location has not been announced yet, nor are there any fights booked for that yet. They've just said that they're doing something on that day.
Okay, got it. Because everyone, that I've been talking about outside of the sort of MMA online space is intrigued by this whole Fight Island idea. And, as someone who's casual adjacent, I always try to keep my ear to the street of what the casuals are really into. So I gotta say immediately, the disappointing thing is that none of the Fight Island events have been announced. You can't just talk it up and then not deliver, Dana. That's like number one rule of promoting. Also, we talked before about how the forum shopping, trying to find the places with the least regulation is a little bit fraught. I'm concerned, as I was the last time we were together, about whether these events are going to go off without a hitch, whether there's going to be some spike in infections in the Florida area based on everything. So the fights themselves, they're interesting. They were interesting when they were announced, but I'm still a little bit skeptical about these events, as from a health perspective.
So my first question is in reference to Fight Island itself. Do you believe it's going to happen? I am still skeptical of it. Just see, he's just talking too much, and it seems too of an ego trip, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. Do you believe Fight Island is really going to happen, and is it going to be what it's being played up to be?
Well, so here's the thing, like you guys, we went through years and years of The Ultimate Fighter, right? And the thing with The Ultimate Fighter is it all took place in Vegas, in a very sort of controlled environment and sequestered environment in Vegas. If there are enough fighters who are willing to, go off contract and go off of what their normal training strategy would be, you could do a tough style series on Fight Island. You could find 12 fighters in various weight, or maybe the same weight class, probably for the best, and sort of structure it that way, where it's few events. I mean, I guess you'd have to do a little bit more if you're going to have more than one fight, like the way that they did for the Ultimate Fighter. So you might have to, sequester 30 fighters. But you guys have talked about it before, and I tend to agree. These guys are thirsty for exposure and for money, and this, warrior mentality type deal. They might be able to find a place and set up all the facilities and convince these guys to basically bring back tough, put it on an island. And depending on how everything else goes with the world at large and with the sporting world, there might be an audience for it. It's just crazy enough to not work, but crazy enough to be a spectacle.
Have you seen, there's been a few, I guess, video clips of old like Bulldog events that have been going around. There's one specifically of Eddie Alvarez that I've seen recently about how they had the ring on the beach based outside. Is that appealing? Like, does that appeal to something from a fan base standpoint when it comes to combat sports? Is that something is that a different enough look to get people excited?
Well, I mean, if they're not going to have live crowds, right? If it's just going to be the corners and the fighters and their camps, so to speak, for, you're going to have to create ambiance some kind of way. So, the idea of a tropical locale at night with, with lights in the background. I mean, it would definitely be different from what we normally see at a UFC fight night. So, like I said, I think the first event would probably get the highest viewership, and then they might have to switch things up from week to week in order to get people to keep coming back. But I can't lie. I'd tune in just to see the spectacle, and I imagine a lot of casual fans will feel the same way.
So I want to ask you a random. Here's a question.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the most Fight Islandy fighter on the UFC roster? What I mean is the person, man or woman, that if someone's going to be fighting on the beach, is this person, and the UFC is going to do everything that they can to get him or her booked. My
Oh, it's
vote.
obviously Donald Cerrone. I mean,
Okay.
like, who's the number 2 pick after Donald Cerrone is the real question.
So my vote was an easy one. My vote was for Mackenzie Dern, because she's the how can I put it nicely, Instagram model-esque on
Oh, I didn't even think about it
roster.
from that perspective.
Maybe her or Paige Van Zandt or someone along those lines, ones who don't mind showing themselves like in that light. I
The
think
only concern with Paige Van Zandt is, my understanding is that she's in the last fight of her deal. So the amount of money they'd have to pay to get her to headline Fight Island, I would imagine they would prefer someone like oh man, I'm forgetting her name now. The one who fought Paige Van Zant and is also really attractive and has done some
Felice
shoots.
Herrig.
Felice Harry, yes. Like she's more like her career is more fraught, and I could see them using and her using Fight Island as a promotional tool for more photo shoots.
They could also go with Michelle Waterson, the karate hottie. That basically says
That's
it
an
all
yeah,
in the name.
but she's got a family. I think, you know, I could see her realizing that some things are more important than that kind of exposure.
True, good thoughts there. Let's talk about some of these fights though, and I have a very interesting question I want to save to the end.
Hmm.
But for UFC Fight Night 171, which is the one on May 13th, the main event scheduled, at least listed on the preliminary fight card right now, is Anthony Smith versus Glover Teixeira. Without breaking anything down or talking anything extra like that, does that fight stand out to you? Like, is that something that is immediately interesting to you?
From a pure, these guys are both kind of in the mix. TM. um, Smith is still wants to still remain relevant. Teixeira wants to show that he still has a little bit left in the tank. I think coming off of all that we know about Smith and the whole thing with the home invasion, and then the back and forth that he's had with John Jones, I think that there's a little bit more smoke behind him right now, and he's in a position that if he were to win and win handily, to get right back in the I want to fight John Jones sweepstakes. So yeah, I mean, I was very skeptical of Smith when he first entered the division, but he's done nothing but impress me. So I want to see if he still has it and he's still willing to kind of play in the elite tier of light heavyweight.
Okay. On paper, this doesn't truly interest me. I've always been a Glover Teixeira guy, and it's good to see him still sticking around, still getting wins at this point in time in his career. But we're going to talk about this more in depth in a second because I want to talk about UFC Fight Night 172, where the main event there is Alistair Overeem versus Walt Harris. Does this one do it for you, Mike, any more or less than that previous fight?
Um, well, full disclosure, I'm an Overeem fan, and it's been a tough little bit, the way he's gotten completely destroyed in some of his last fights. Um, I know that he's being offered out for the slaughter for Harris, but putting aside that, it's not as easily appealing of a sell. I don't happen to know if there's any kind of grudge match component to this fight. It just kind of strikes me as let's try to get a name heavyweight win on Harris's resume and hope that he can, use it to capitalize and get himself in that really thin tier of title contenders at heavyweight, especially once Cormier retires. So, I mean, I would say if we were doing the MMA rating style rate your anticipation, this would probably get a 6 or a 7 in my eyes.
See, I'm not ashamed to say, I'm an Overeem fan too. I'm a fan since the Demolition Man days. I wish he would bring that nickname back. But yeah, you're right. He is definitely on more of a slide than not. Do you think this is a fight that sets up Walt Harris as a potential title contender?
I think that's what the UFC would want. Obviously, as we know, when Overeem loses, he usually, you know, posterizes himself. And I think the UFC is hoping that Harris can get that kind of highlight reel, to run incessantly, and he's going to talk himself. If he wins, he's going to call somebody out, and yeah, I think the UFC is hoping that Harris wins and that he wins in such exciting fashion that he can carry that into being a fresh contender for whoever wins. Actually, obviously not whoever wins between Cormier and Stipe, but next man up. After that.
Okay, awesome there. And like I said, there's no fights yet scheduled for the event on the 23rd. How will fans respond? Do you think that this aggressive push to bring back MMA will be received well by fans, like as in they'll sit down to watch? Or do you think we've had so much time away from MMA that we now have different things taking up space in our life on like during the weekend and the week?
That's I mean, I think a lot of that's going to depend on ESPN. I think that ESPN has, themselves been kind of thirsty for new material. And I think that to the extent that there are MMA fans that are regular ESPN watchers, obviously the biggest event of the week of the week so far in these last couple of weeks has been the Michael Jordan documentary, and that's on ESPN. And I could definitely see UFC putting their ads into those and getting the eyeballs that these fight cards are coming up. And, I don't necessarily know whether the pay-per-view is going to do very well, but I think the free events stand to experience an uptick because people are going to be sitting in their homes and they're going to kind of want to dip their toe in and see what this new setup is like. And it's possible that if the first event is just boring, that they won't show up for the second and third event, especially just a couple of days later. But if it ends up being exciting, if they figure out a way, with their production to keep it moving and to keep it feeling fresh, then yeah, I mean, people are home. People are still trying to get their sports fix.
So, okay, let's because you excuse me, you brought up an interesting question because you're right. The Last Dance is probably the biggest thing going on in the sports world right now. Period. The first episode got 6.1. Okay, hold on. So the preview. Let me see something. So the third and fourth episodes got about 5.9 million viewers. The first two episodes got about 3.2. No, hold on. Let me see something. Because I think the first episodes 1 and 2, which aired on the first. Okay, so here we go. The first one averaged 6.3 million viewers in its debut and 5.8 so 6.3 million viewers for the first episode, 5.8 for the second. And then episodes 3 and 4, which was this past weekend, got 6.1 million viewers for episode 3, and then episode 4 got 5.7 million. So it would be a good idea for them to take these upcoming events and promote them during that night. And you know what? I think they did drop a UFC 249 preview during the episode 3. They may have. I feel like they may have. But I know I've seen one. But that would be a great place for them to drop that some promos for these upcoming events with all those millions of viewers watching.
Yeah, I definitely think that ESPN. I mean, one of the things that actually worked exactly as planned with the UFC and their deal with ESPN is the way that ESPN has sort of seamlessly stepped into the role of promotional partner with the UFC. I think, and I think that now with the dearth of major sports events, I think that partnership is even more solidified. And I think that anything they can do to leverage the viewership from one event to, a live sporting event where, all their bread is buttered, I think that this is definitely something we're going to see. And I don't remember, so it's a 10-part series, right? Last
Yes.
Dance. So do we know when the finale would air based on that? I guess that's, we're 4 episodes in.
Yes, we're 4 episodes in. I think
Right.
it's
So the next 3 weeks. So it looks like that would coincide with that big UFC fight week, right?
that looks no, because UFC Fight Week is 2 Saturdays away.
Oh,
Oh
okay.
no, excuse me. UFC 249 is 2 Saturdays away, and yes, that would so yes, it would coincide with. all those UFC events, because the 10th would be the series finale, and then those fights are the 13th and 16th.
Right. So I mean, traditionally the finales, traditionally the finale would get the highest rating. They'd have the most eyeballs, and you know they would be in a position to have promo spots for both of those events, if not outright promo packages for those events. And you know they will have, once those viewers are, you know, satiated, well, not satiated actually, you know, once their appetite has been sort of tempted and appetized, they may be looking for the next big thing, and the next big thing could be UFC events right a few days later.
Good thoughts. That's definitely some good thoughts there. And since we're talking about these upcoming fights, I want to talk about specifically the fighters who are competing in these fights. I'm not sure if you saw Michael Chiesa's comments, but he basically drew the line in the sand where he said he's not willing to fight during this time. And I want to read his quote exactly. Let me pull that back up. It's kind of long, so bear with me for a second. But his comment, it was because it was pretty enlightening to me, and I want to talk about specifically why. But the question is, and this is his quote, when are you going to fight again? That's a question many of us fighters are being asked regularly. On the heels of my biggest win to date, there is nothing I want more than to get back into the octagon and compete. Fighting in an empty arena feels almost advantageous to me after I spent time on tough. Competing in that type of environment is not what I'm worried about. It's the preparation that's holding me back. Gyms are closed, training partners are scarce, and coaches and teammates are doing what's best to protect the health of their family, all of which are things I empathize with 110%. On top of that, there's other problems behind the scenes that are better left unsaid. I know many fighters are experiencing the same challenges in trying to put together a camp right now. There's some people that have enough resources to make it happen right now, but unfortunately, I'm not one of those people. Ultimately, I have two choices. One is to keep doing what I can to stay fit and wait for restrictions to lift. The other is to make some choices and moves to get me in a position where I can be confident I can prepare for a fight. My stance on who I fight next will remain the same. It has to be someone ranked ahead of me. Out of respect for that short list of guys and the wishes of my family, I'm not going to show up. I'm not showing up unless I'm at my absolute best. All I can say is I hope to get back in there sooner than later, and I am proactively searching for solutions on my own. I hope everyone out there is staying safe, staying healthy. God bless. Now, that is a pretty important statement to me because I think it draws attention to the quality of fights we're going to be getting on these initial cards. First, Michael, let's start with Michael himself. Does it surprise you that he's decided to kind of stand aside and wait until the situation gets more improved to fight?
It definitely surprises me that a fighter of his stature is taking such a bold stance. I mean, I respect it totally. You know, I would have imagined that, you know, he's still trying to build up his name, and often it's those fighters that are just desperate to keep their name in the, you know, you see it in pro wrestling circles. You know, if you don't, if you're gone, there's always someone to jump in and try to take your spot. um, so I respect it a lot. And it does surprise me that he's not an established name. He's not a former champion. He's never, well, has he headlined an event? I can't remember. I mean,
His fight against Kevin Lee, I think, was the headliner.
okay, so he has headlined an event. So, I mean, but you know, hasn't, he's not a dyed in the wool constant headliner. So I think that all of his points are valid. I think that this is the stance that most professionals, you know, should be taking. On the other hand, that kind of ties back into what I was saying before about Fight Island. If the concern is the prep, the training, the access to training partners, one of the things that we remembered about Tough is that having the fighters train amongst each other, and having them fly in state of the art training staffs. The UFC's got the money to make it worthwhile for those guys. Those gyms are closed, like he said. They're not doing anything. They'd probably relish the opportunity to work in a closed environment if the money's right. And who knows, maybe they could sort of steal some fighters, steal some high level fighters over to their camps by showing them things that they didn't have before. I could
So,
see Dana firing back, or maybe a more savvy version of Dana sort of saying, well, this is why we are creating this Fight Island closed environment, so that the fighters can be in a trusted universe where there are training partners and the safety protocols are being kept. Now, again, I'm skeptical about whether all those things are true, but in terms of whether they can sell it that way, I think that that's an opportunity for them.
so you said that it does surprise you, and I'm going to talk about why it doesn't surprise me. If a fighter is ranked specifically, Chiesa sitting at number 8. I'm gonna be nice and say like 5 and above. They have nothing to gain by trying to fight in a situation like this. You saw Amanda Nunez look at her situation with Felicia Spencer and say, you know what, I'm good. I'm not going to fight right now. I think champions and top 5 ranked fighters will not be fighting during this time. And that's why these fights are not going to have the name value that people want to expect. So I think that may hinder some of the rankings questions as well. I mean, at heavyweight, of course, let me pull it up real quick. At heavyweight, Alistair Overeem is ranked number 8 and Walt Harris is ranked number 9. So there isn't any, and you have Anthony Smith at light heavyweight, who's ranked number 3, and Glover Teixeira is ranked number 8. I think Anthony Smith might be the highest ranked fighter we see competing until that UFC, outside of that UFC 249 event. I don't think we're going to see many champions and highly ranked fighters fighting until they can know that they can get a fully functional camp around them with their best interest in mind.
So I have a counter to that, and it ties into my conspiracy theory as the UFC rankings are concerned. We've known for a while that the rankings can be used as a promotional tool, and we know that Dana likes to play these guys don't want to fight card, particularly when fighters are holding out for contractual reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I would not be surprised if strategically fighters started moving up the rankings and moving down the rankings based on their willingness to fight during this time. I would not be surprised if in the upcoming weeks, the fighters that are named as headliners in these late May events just get more highly ranked. They get talked up, they get promoted more, and all of a sudden, they're maybe, like, I think you're right. I think fighters above 5 don't have the incentive, but I think that there's an incentive on the UFC side to have the fighters be as close to top 10 as possible, even if they can't get a fighter above 5.
So we'll see what happens, but I think that highly ranked fighters have no incentive behind fighting right now, and I don't expect to see a lot of them stepping up to hop into the cage sooner rather than later.
I mean, actually, and now that I think about it, I could see them rolling out a totally different set of rankings based on only the fighters that have decided that they're going to fight, coming up with some kind of shenanigan where, like, maybe the number 1 contender will stay the number 1 contender, but everything above that is just, wide open. I mean, would you put that past the UFC, honestly?
I mean, you can't put anything past them, and I wouldn't be surprised if they would just do the switcheroo like that. So there's one other question I wanted to talk about when it comes to Chiesa as well is this the correct step for him after taking such a big win over Rafael dos Anjos, a former champion, former welterweight title challenger? Do you think that taking time away puts him at a disadvantage, or should he be looking to get back in there, or is it the right move for him to look at his career right now and say, you know what, my best bet is being at 100% when I get back in?
Yeah, I tend towards the latter. I think that he's not the kind of fighter that the UFC generally pushes, both in terms of fighting style, personality, and just kind of the overall ambiance that he brings. He's sort of ground his way into contendership. And for that reason, I think he should be concerned that, taking a bad loss or taking any kind of loss could keep him out of the contendership circle for this foreseeable future. Whenever the next big thing kind of comes into play, he's at welterweight right now, right? So even though there are a fair number of welterweight fighters that are ahead of him in terms of who the promotion favors. Even even McGregor, if McGregor were to somehow lose to Gaethje, whoever he fights next, I could see him fighting again at welterweight and getting fast tracked. So if you're in a position of holding a win streak at welterweight, you don't want to have that be blown off of a fight with minimal prep, and know that you don't have a quick way to reverse that narrative.
All right there. So I'm interested in seeing what's next for him and how I want to see. I hope someone tracks the fights that people who took time or said no fight. I want to see what fights they get next, and I hope someone pays a very close attention.
Yeah, that seems like a good piece. Maybe someone will write that piece for MMA ratings.
So we got a couple of listener questions. This is a little bit of a shorter show because there's not as much news going on.
Right.
Got some questions. So what happens if these UFC events, if the ratings are lower than expected? And I talk about that because we see what's going on with the WWE right now.
Mm-hmm.
They are probably one of the only live showcases that are still going on. They actually recently switched up their schedule, but their last 3 or 4 shows have been live, and their ratings are continuously dropping now. Part of that is because the content they've been putting forth for the last couple of years has just not been great, and I think people are really fed up at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
But even still, to see their numbers drastically declining in a time when there's nothing else on has people kind of surprised. So what happens from the UFC standpoint if ratings for these 3 events and UFC 249 are lower than expected?
Well, this is when I really do think that their partnership with ESPN can really work out for them in a really beneficial way. I think that one of the things we've talked about for many years is that the UFC generally controls the production and how the broadcasts flow, and it's somewhat cookie cutter. I mean, they've made some tweaks here and there along the way, that, such as getting rid of Face the Pain. But I could see the network knowing what their exposure is with these events, taking a stronger hand and trying to figure out how to move the presentation forward and make the show more showy, or make it feel like more of an event, so as to, I mean, I think they will continue to ramp up their promotion, and I think they will, now that they have ESPN Plus, there are a lot of ways that ESPN can monetize these cards, but I think that there will be a conversation happening at the higher levels as to how to best promote going forward, especially, in fact, even in the post Corona world, what it is that the fans would be looking for, and trying to get at what the answer to unlock the puzzle of marketing fights to a sports, a mainstream sports centric audience.
See, I'm really interested in seeing what these numbers mean long term, because when times like this are obstructed, or like when there's obstruction the way we're kind of seeing right now, we see that people go away and they don't come back. But this is definitely a different time than anything we've ever experienced across history before. So there's still like some uncertainty on what's going to happen when things go back to normal. And I'm saying normal in air quotes because I don't think that anything's going to be normal after this. So I'm really interested in seeing what the ratings look like, and especially if this leads to a space where people are going back out again. Like when economies do open up, people aren't going to be home on Fridays and Saturdays anymore. But at the same time, I don't think people are going to be able to watch these events like in the big watch parties like they used to as well too. So there's really a double-edged sword to what's really going to happen once these shows start rolling off of the docket. So it is something to watch. I do think ratings are going to be lower.
But one thing, that you made a really good point, and it's one thing that I've kind of been exploring on our end is, the virtual watch party. I'm really surprised that they haven't started to make steps, that on the UFC and ESPN side, towards getting something like a virtual watch party going, where people are watching their fights with their Zoom cameras, and they're broadcasting the fan reactions of different, from different areas. I think that could be a direction that they move into, in terms of converting what used to be a communal thing, because people were gathered together, to a sort of a virtual communal thing where people are watching it apart but together. You were seeing it in other sports. We just saw the virtual NFL draft, and how they kind of played that. I think that there are a lot of things that that ESPN can take from how the draft went and incorporate that into their sports broadcast going forward. I mean, I had mentioned that before with the other events, the other sports that are planning to come back with no crowds. I did think that there was some benefit to having an interactive virtual component to the crowds and to fan feedback. I mean, if fans always want to be part of the show, and if you could create an opportunity for them to be part of the show through this virtual platform, then I think that's a new way to kind of build excitement and anticipation for these events.
So what's interesting is you brought up the draft, and this is another intriguing note here, because the NFL draft this year, make sure I'm looking at the right thing. Correct. Guess the number of viewers that the draft peaked at.
Yeah. I mean, if I had to, I mean, normally I don't pay attention to draft numbers, so I'd say something like 10 million.
19.6
Woo!
is what it peaked at, and that's a 37% increase over last year's audience. So yeah, I guess if the excitement is there, there's a space for people who can want to sit at home and still watch some action. So maybe I'll be wrong, and maybe these events will do massive numbers. I mean, it'll be something that nobody will see, and then I guess the conversation changes from there. From if not only if these events draw ratings, but if these fans stick around, like that may be something big. And at the end of the day, we may be saying Dana White was right.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, one thing that we do have to take into account is that we have the test of the UFC Brasilia event, and how the ambiance of a fight taking place in an empty arena um, profoundly affects what it's like to view a fight. It's one thing to watch a mediocre fight when the crowd is doing a little something, and watching a mediocre to bad fight when it's just silence. Um, that, I think, for a lot of people, figuring out how to crack the nut of an event where there's no crowd response is going to be the difference between something that people want to watch for 3 hours, or something that might just want to dip their toe in and check out the highlights for.
All right, good thoughts there, sir. So why don't you let everyone know what you're working on, man? We want to go ahead and close out the show today.
So, as you know, I don't do as much writing as I used to. I haven't gotten a lot of inspiration for fighting. I mean, for writing rather. Um, I just Adam, who does the bulk of the writing, just finished up a series of pieces, sort of matchmaking each of the UFC divisions after the Corona thing clears up. Obviously, the Corona thing hasn't cleared up, but some of the fights have started to come back. But I do urge people to look at those fights, and and see which ones they would like to see versus the ones that have been booked. I'm trying to stay up to date with all the fights as they come out. I'm trying to get everyone back on board with their anticipation for, and I'm gonna try to think about some retrospectives, so to speak, in terms of like this time last year, what was happening, the different narratives, and hopefully that'll get people back into thinking about, being an MMA fan on an ongoing basis. Coming to the site every day and reading what we have to prevent. And by all means, I'm still trying to get the podcast numbers up, get everyone hyped up about that. you know, I've got my own stuff that's not MMA related that, you know, I could tease on another another occasion. Obviously, I'm trying to prompt Shawan to do the melding of MMA and comic books that the fans love so much. But yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of my own stuff happening, but you know me, I'm making moves behind the scenes always.
Good stuff, man. I know we're always working our asses off, all of us, across these platforms. So as always, we're thankful for MMA ratings being a space where we can showcase our thoughts on the MMA world. I am always, as always, covering mixed martial arts and professional wrestling. You can catch me at rgarcia_sports to see all of that content. This podcast is every Tuesday, and we talk wrestling towards the end of the week. Not that really doesn't have a set show, but we always make sure we talk about when that's going up. So,
Oh, speaking of wrestling, since we should at least talk about Cain Velasquez getting reportedly let go from WWE. Like, what would you say? How would you say his WWE tenure? Would you say it was mostly successful or mostly a failure?
it wasn't successful at all.
Oh wow.
It was the biggest waste of. It was a huge waste of money. It was a waste of. I mean, it impacted so many people. It impacted Brock Lesnar. It impacted Kofi Kingston. It impacted Roman. Like, there's so many different names that it impacted just him being brought in the way he was and leverage like that. It's almost unfortunate, and I wish. I'm, it's on top of that. The reason why he hasn't been used is because he's been hurt. So if you know anything about Cain Velasquez, the man can sneeze and he's going to blow out one of his knees. So no one should have been surprised that they couldn't leverage him when this whole thing went down. So it is what it is. He's gone. He was flash in the pan. It's a footnote below all other footnotes.
So do we think he'll make a comeback to
Not in
MMA when?
WWE. Maybe AAA or something like that again. Maybe back in Mexico, but not in WWE.
Well, let's see. What was that promotion that with Tito Ortiz and Combate,
Impact.
right?
That was a TNA Impact. Well, it was TNA Impact. Now it's just Impact.
No, 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 no. I meant the MMA promotion. Sorry, the one with Tito Ortiz
Combates.
and yeah, Combate. I mean, they like to kind of play around in the pro wrestling space with their gimmicks. I mean, maybe they can make something between him and um, what's the guy's name? The one I'm talking about, El Patron.
Patron. Yeah. So
Yeah.
they have a couple of women on their roster that are professional wrestlers as well. So there might be a space for that. We'll see what happens, but I don't think they're gonna. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't dabble in that space because he has to be expensive.
Well, I mean, it would definitely put. I mean, a Tito Ortiz versus Cain Velasquez fight in Combate would, probably some number of pay-per-views, right?
Oh man, I couldn't even imagine spending money on that. But yeah, man, thank you again for joining in on the show today, and we
Yo,
will.
anytime. Well, as long as this Corona thing goes, I'm just a text message away, and I'll hop on and fill in, and maybe we can get another 3-man booth sometime soon.
Awesome, we will, man.
All
And
right.
with that in mind, let's go ahead and close out. Thank you, everyone, and we'll be back next week.
All right.